The phrase that most captures my career journey is, "You alone are enough." Unlike so many of my peers and so many of the people who I admire and I look up to, especially in this corporate space, I did not have a traditional upbringing. Didn't have a village of people who were educated or ambitious or maybe had careers in a sector that was really admired or sought after. Kind of had to pull myself up from the bottom by my own bootstraps. And that was hard. I grew up in homeless shelters. So I didn't have a lot of examples of people that I could look up to who could show for me the art of the possible or what I could become. But I did have something a lot of other people didn't have, and that was an insatiable appetite for learning. I never stopped learning. I was so curious all the time. So I would constantly read books. I would constantly seek after mentors and ask questions. What is it that you do? What do you have to go to school for to become that? I was very, very curious. And I think that allowed me to achieve so much and accomplish so much. And more importantly than anything else, it allowed me to help others and give back and create other future leaders, which is so important and so impactful for me. And I did that with just the brain that I was born with. So I always tell myself, you alone are enough.
At PepsiCo, we know that our company can only succeed when our associates and the society we serve flourishes. That's why we are committed to fostering a diverse workforce by creating a collaborative, equitable, and inclusive space where everyone, regardless of what we look like, where we come from, or who we love, has a voice. A space where we aren't just heard, but we are actively listened to. A space where we don't just talk, but we're free to speak fearlessly. A space where we're not just content, but we are confident. And right now, we are proudly actioning these promises.
You walk the walk and talk the talk. You being a strong woman inspires me.
At today's PepsiCo, women hold 41% of our global manager positions.
I feel like I have been set up for success in a lot of different ways because I have been surrounded by such strong females in my career.
We've invested more than $570 million to advance our racial equality journey, elevating diverse voices within our company, our supply chain partners, and our communities.
Giving $50,000 to put towards your education.
My parents worked so hard, and to be given this chance, I'm so thankful.
You have made my dreams come true, really.
I'm so grateful for this opportunity.
We've created a gender diversity task force in the U.S. to help develop resources for our transgender, gender nonconforming, and gender non-binary employees.
We're not just doing this for the corporate employees, we're doing it for all of the roles. This is exactly why I chose Pepsi over, some company that also big but doesn't have that type of scope.
We're enhancing recruitment and inclusive practices for people with disabilities across our businesses.
They don't treat me any different. They treat me as just Brian.
Our Rolling Remembrance initiative has raised approximately $860,000 to date in college scholarships for military children who have lost a parent in the line of duty. And of course, we continue to leverage the powerful voices of our brands to inspire positive change. Because when we have a space to authentically be ourselves and explore each other's ideas with compassionate curiosity, we move from uniformity to diversity, and from diversity to equity and inclusion. Only then can we deliver more smiles and build a better workplace for our people and a better world for our business partners and communities, to provide a space to be you.
Please welcome to the stage Amy Dubois Barnett, Chief Content Officer, Outside Inc. Moderated by Melanie Wilson-Smith, Chief Procurement Officer, PepsiCo.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'm so excited to talk to you today and to talk with Amy Dubois Barnett. So, Amy is the Chief Content Officer of Outside Interactive, and you've probably heard about her background. She was most recently with Viacom and CBS, leading BET Media. But I think most exciting is the fact that she is an athlete and a global adventurer. So, she's been all around the world. She shot Class 5 rapids in the Zambezi, kayaked to a glacier in Iceland, and so super cool background. But what brings us to this conversation today is personal branding. And it's a topic that I think each of us in our careers had that moment when we've said, what is my brand? How do I tell my story about my brand? And how does that help me progress from a career perspective? So Amy's going to talk to us a little bit more about that today. So why don't we talk now in terms of the origin of your brand and sort of how you think about it and how it relates to your life experiences.
Sure. First of all, I appreciate the introduction. Hey, everybody, it's like to talk to you today. And I have, my origin story for my brand is interesting because it's really rooted in authenticity. So much of my life has been impacted by kind of what happened in my teens and then in my early 20s, most specifically with my mom. So my mom was an absolute rock star. She was the first Black woman to be president of a major research university in this country. She was just incredibly impactful for me. And when I was 22 years old, I had just graduated from college. She passed away suddenly, and it was just the most devastating thing that's ever happened to me in my life, but also something that just sort of infused my entire character with something new and something different, right? So, I remember there was one day, for example, when I was walking around my room after she passed away, and obviously I'm depressed and it was, devastating. And I passed this sort of picture of she and I on a dresser. And it was the two of us, and we were actually in India, where I lived as a little girl, with her when she was doing her PhD research, she and my dad. And I passed this picture, and I had this sort of revelatory moment. It was like a religious moment where I also was like, oh my goodness, she is not coming to save me. And obviously that's fairly self-evident. She was not alive, but it was like this moment where I was like, oh my God, like, I was used to having my mom sort of always there to kind of, save me or guide me or what have you. And I realized that she was not coming to save me, that this was my life and my life alone. And it was absolutely terrifying because I realized how alone I was, but it was also incredibly empowering because I realized that my life was my own and I could do with it whatever I wanted, right? And it was just a deeply sort of empowering thing that washed over me and really changed my philosophy. It made me do a 180, and I started to live my life in a much more authentic way, which became the root of my brand.
Mm-hmm.
My brand is it's about, it really is at the root authenticity, right? It's about sort of transformation and change, and, kind of like, fun and personality, but really just at the base of it is a real authenticity. So I kind of processed what that was, and I sort of really became extremely comfortable in my own skin. And then during the time when I've been in media for, I guess, 20 years. So I've been editor-in-chief of a few national magazines, Ebony, Teen People, which is the teen version of People magazine, and Honey magazine. That was the first magazine that I was, for which I was editor-in-chief. And so when I was EIC of Honey, I started to write my editors letters in a way that were not like the normal editor's letters of a magazine that were like, on page 15, there's a really awesome lipstick. On page 75, there's a really cool story on like, this one dude. But instead I used that page to talk about things that I had kind of learned, right? And I would phrase it in a way that was, with my stories, there was always stories. And it was like, here's something that, more often than not went wrong for me. Like, this is something that I just completely screwed up. Here's what went wrong. Here's the whole story. Here's what I learned then. Here's what I know now. And here's how you can not repeat my error. Or here's how you can do this awesome thing too. And that became the sort of public facing, sort of professional route of my origin story, because people really responded well. And I processed that there was something resonant about humanizing success and the authenticity that I was presenting myself without a lot of, sort of, kind of artifice or what have you, like really made a lot of sense. And so that really became the sort of like there was a personal, sort of origin story around the authenticity of who I am and being comfortable in my own skin. And then there was the professional origin story of really processing what it means to have a public facing brand that people respond to, and then that you hold on to and you nurture.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I love the fact that it's how the personal experience impacted who you are and how you are, and turning such a devastating situation into what does that mean for you in your future and your just how you show up in the world. But then bringing that into the professional sphere, bringing that authenticity and the ability to share broadly, allowing people to connect to you and to learn from that. So, super. Have you found that your brand has continued to develop over time? So starting with that authenticity, thinking about how to connect to people through that, and then how's it changed over time?
I would say that it has changed. I've been, refining. It's been refined just because, I'm human, and so I'm getting refined over time. And then it's also, I've been a little more intentional about it of late. But I would say that it has, it's based in values. It's based in a way that I walk through the world that I feel very comfortable in. And a lot of it has to do with, kind of the authenticity and the being comfortable. But the way that sort of manifested, after my mom's death was really about kind of adventure and bravery, and a desire to live life in a very sort of open and bold way. And the way that manifested in professional settings was being a change agent, right? So that's really how my brand began to evolve in professional settings. I started to process that one of the things that I'm really good at is coming in and changing things, just being transformative, being a change agent. And so that is the way in which my brand kind of evolved over time, and then there's sort of more sort of like specifics and underpinnings and ways that you kind of make that, more effective in professional settings. But after a while, this sort of change maker, transformative layer, kind of began to emerge, and it's something that I've crafted and cultivated over the years.
Yeah. I think the other thing that's great about that is owning it, right? So for you to talk about how that's your hallmark, that's your claim to fame, and something that you've learned how to do and a way to deliver value. So as you do that, what advice would you give to other people as they're thinking about their own brand and how to own it and how to shape it based on your experiences?
I have found that having a brand that's rooted in personal values has been very helpful, right? And I think that it's helpful for everybody, so that it's easier to be consistent. It's easier to be authentic. It's easier to kind of maintain it if it's rooted in a way you feel comfortable walking through the world, right? So that's, I think, would be the first part of my advice. Just try to root it in something that reflects who you are, so that you can maintain it comfortably, and so that's more fun for you too, right? Like, it would be really hard for me if my personal brand were kind of like, hard driving, I don't know, forensic analysis, right? Then that would be harder for me to maintain, because it's a little bit counter to, sort of my personality, right? Which is not to say I don't know what that looks like and I can't oversee it, but it doesn't feel authentic to the way that I walk through the world. It doesn't reflect kind of who I am. So I think that would be the first piece of advice. And then, I could talk a lot about how you maintain your brand. I mean, I think there's just being very mindful of it, being intentional about it, right? So that everything that you're doing that's public facing reflects this image that you've cultivated, that is honestly, can be at least both personal and professional, right? There's a personal layer to my brand that I'm not as intentional about, because it just, again, is authentic and it reflects who I am. But I recognize it, and I know it's there. And I know when I'm not sort of acting like people expect, my sort of personal brand, they get sort of confused, like, well, why aren't you being, this Amy that we know? So I'm cognizant of it. And then there's the professional part that layers on top of it. So there's kind of both pieces of the brand, and I am mindful for everything that I have in my life, all of my media and my presentations, my social, like, all my signature on my email, all of the things that I'm cognizant of my personal brand and the desire to make sure that everything, as much as possible, is authentic and consistent.
Yeah, I think that that point about consistency is so important, and so branding shouldn't be a load, and that's to your point about it. It's part of who you are. It's a core to your personal values, but it's also something that does need to be cultivated. And so I love the examples that you give around how you show up in media, and your email signature is part of that. One of the things also is, as you just think back about career experiences, are there a couple career experiences that you would point to that really helped cement your brand or helped you, shape or maintain it?
I would definitely, sort of again point to the experience at, at Honey Magazine, the first place where I was editor in chief, and the response that those letters, got. It really helped me. It just put everything into focus, just distilled and crystallized for me, who I am, and part of the reason why I walk through the world. I think there's a purpose behind my brand also, because there's a mentorship layer to it also, and there's a strong desire in me to help other people just live their most authentic and biggest life. Like, that's kind of at the core of who I am. Like, how can you live your most authentic and your biggest life? And so when I left Honey and when I was at Teen People, I ended up getting approached by a literary agent, to see if there was something that a sort of book in me. And what was actually amazing was that I ended up taking a lot of those letters from my editor-in-chief letters from Honey, and not reformatting them, but using them as the base for a book that I published that really reflected my my kind of core philosophy, my core values, and my personal brand, right? And so I think that is definitely a professional, obviously a personal experience that sort of validated, this brand that I was putting forth in the world. And then there have been other times when the brand has been, really valuable. And I remember once, it was after Teen People, and I was in a meeting, and somebody was describing my background, and I will say it this way: I was not in a group of people that appreciated Honey Magazine or Ebony Magazine, or people were like, "What is your background? Like, what is that?" And so, but there was, I guess, fortunately, somebody in the room who remembered me from Teen People and remembered the transformative redesign I did of that brand and the digital platform and the magazine and all of that. And they were like, "Oh my gosh, I remember your Teen People, it was transformative and this and that." And that really helped, because it made the room comfortable and it helped everybody kind of understand who I was. So that was just another instance where having this sort of change maker reputation and having backed it up by professional experience really influenced the trajectory of my professional life.
What a great example. And so it just goes to show that, again, that congruency or that consistency, how it carries through and sort of propels over time. So as you think back about your background and think about where you're headed next, so in a new role, how can you continue to shape your brand in your new role and continue to develop it?
It's interesting that you're asking that. I mean, this is a very new job. I just started my job, guys, a month ago, so brand new. And I have been very intentional about the way that I start this job, and it's been really interesting, because I've really been able to take the learnings over the course of my career and apply them to this role. And a big chunk of that has been about my brand, right? How am I going to walk into this job? How are people going to perceive me? Because the reality is, perception is reality. That's the reality, is it's perception, right? So I mean, so the way that you kind of walk in and how you present yourself, I mean, these are the things that people are going to measure you by, and I'm very, very aware of that. So I walked into this job with a whole lot of intention around the way, not just the job I wanted to do, like with some plans mapped out for my 30, 60, 90, things I wanted to accomplish, but I also walked in, kind of understanding this is how I want people to perceive me, right? And this is a role where, I was a little bit more intentional about putting forth, the sort of the change maker, transformative reputation, but I really want to back it up with a lot of intentionality. So I've been using the word intentional a lot. I've been using the word focus a lot. And I've just been, trying to be as clear as possible about what it is I want to do and how that reflects who I am and how I want to kind of, be in this job. But then in addition, I also have been working with an executive coach to help me figure out how to not just, create the most sort of successful onboarding possible, but how do I maintain this image? How do I make sure that I am doing the best possible job with regard to all of my communication protocols, the relationships that I'm building. And how do I do all of that in a way that's authentic and reflects my brand and reflects the kind of success that I want to deliver in the job.
Yeah, awesome. Great example. We've got a couple questions from folks in the audience who are getting a lot out of the conversation. And so, to the point we're just talking about, how would you suggest finding a mentor who can help you cultivate your brand, especially if you're new to a company or industry? So something maybe from your personal experience or in your position, how would you suggest somebody go about doing that?
That's an interesting question. I've never had a mentor help me cultivate my brand per se, but I have had mentors who have helped me, who have given me feedback on my brand. And I've had like sort of consiglieres, who have let me know sometimes in challenging conversations when I'm not being authentic to my brand, or when the schism between my self-perception and others' perceptions of me has been wider than I realized. Because that's something, you guys, like, if you leave this with nothing else, just remember that the way people perceive you is very different, can be very different than the energy that you're putting out. Like, you may think that you're acting in like, or putting forth this kind of a brand, but somebody may be receiving you in a completely different way. So oftentimes, mentors or consiglieres, that I've had around me in the professional setting have been able to help me bridge that gap by letting me know, hey, I know you think X, Y, and Z, but actually this is the way it's being perceived, and that's really helped me kind of, sort of pivot or course correct, so that at least I am behaving in a way that's a little bit closer to the energy that I want to put forth. So in terms of finding mentors, I mean, it's I think that it's sort of about energy, right? So it's about people with whom you connect. You can't just kind of go up to somebody at a conference and be like, "Hey, you look cool. Can you be my mentor?" You have to kind of find some way of building a relationship, right? And you want to build relationships before you need them. That's another like just sort of key thing in life. Like, don't wait until you need a relationship to build a relationship. If there's somebody that you admire, that you connect with, then try to build that relationship and do it slowly. You do in a way that, you're just sort of, hitting them up like, every now and then, and not just always about you. Maybe like you see something that they've achieved, in media, and you can say, oh my gosh, congratulations on the whatever launch, congratulations on your new book, congratulations on your new role. I know you're going to crush it. Like, this is amazing. Please let me know if there's anything I can do to help you, et cetera, et cetera. And then after, kind of building a relationship over some time, then you can say, hey, I would really love to do you have 15 minutes on your calendar to give me some advice about X, Y, and Z, right? So that's how I would do it, with somebody who's much more senior. But then in your workplace, for the more kind of consiglieres, that's a matter of building up like trust. I mean, relationships in your professional life are just incredibly important. I cannot overstate it. You want to build relationships, with the people that you're working with, so that you have somebody that you can turn to say, hey, can you give me some feedback on this? How do you think I'm being perceived? Do you think this is coming off in the right way? It's an incredibly valuable type of relationship to have that's more lateral.
It is, absolutely. I think that, that, again, it goes back to your authenticity and being able to connect with people. There's another question in terms of coaching. So you talked about how to find a mentor, sort of senior and then at peer level. Have you found throughout your career you've had coaches at every step of the way? And did that happen organically? Have you ever been part of a program that sort of fostered that? Maybe talk a little bit more about that.
No, I have not. I really wish I had more executive coaches. It might have helped me with some of the foibles. I could have really used an executive coach, more. But I mean, it's been a more recent thing. I think over the last, maybe like 4 years, 3-4 years, because I processed that as I got sort of more and more senior, that there's just the complexity of the teams that I was managing and the people that I was dealing with and the relationships that I was trying to build, especially if you're walking into professional settings that are more challenging, right? Where there's some dysfunction, where there's a really challenging personality, where you're walking into a team that has had difficulties or something like that. So that's when I first engaged an executive coach, and I found it just incredibly useful because it's like the old adage. What is it? I'm going to screw this up, but the older you are, the less you know, or something like that, whatever it is. But that's, on one hand, that's not true because I've, kind of continued to refine my perspective. And on the other hand, I'm like, actually, like I process, there's a lot of help that I could have to really, kind of put forth, like the sort of best possible version of myself in a professional setting. And so that's why I ended up engaging a professional coach. The other thing that you can do if if your job won't pay for a professional coach, or if you don't have professional coach money, because it can be expensive, is to try to join with professional organizations. I'm also a member of an organization called Chief, which is for executive women. It's a little bit like, it's kind of not exclusive, but it's a little harder to get into because you have to kind of be at a more senior point in your career. But it's been really helpful for me because I've gotten to know a lot of women at similar points in their career who've also been able to give me advice. But there's all kinds of organizations for folks at all different levels of your career. And sometimes you can get really amazing coaching from your peers. Just kind of develop a group of folks around you that are similarly minded, goal-oriented, you respect, smart, women, men, whatever it is, and lean on them for advice and for coaching until you get to a point, if you ever get to a point that you want an executive coach or where you can have an executive coach.
Yeah, very great. Fantastic. So I want to go back to the conversation about your brand and maybe some advice that you have for other folks who may see themselves in a similar vein. So you talked about being a change agent and driving transformation. So one of the questions that came in is around the fact that, I think we would all recognize change is good for organizations. It's good to continue to progress and to grow the organization, but are often met with resilience by people. So it's hard. So as a change agent, do you have any advice about how to be a transformational leader without being labeled as threatening or sort of, being, put to the side because people feel like the change is too much, too fast? So
that's a whole separate talk. That's also, I mean, it's a great question. Whoever asked it's a really, really great question. And it's hard. And it's a great question because I've done it now several times, and it's incredibly difficult to walk into a situation where you have a lot of legacy people, or there's a legacy corporate culture, or there's a legacy brand, or whatever it is that's been around for some time, and you've got some folks who are very invested in whatever that brand is, from that period of time. And you're walking in, but that, you have to make change. You have to make change in the company culture. You've got to make change in the brand. You've got to make change in the product. You've got to make change in the people. All of that is incredibly difficult, So the way that I found for me that I sort of function best in those environments is to walk in, is to have a strong vision, right? Because I think if you get people excited around a vision for the future, right? You don't just kind of walk in and say, like, I can't believe that you're not doing like 5 reports, per week. And when I was in my old job, we did 17, and now you guys are only doing 2, whatever. That's not gonna make anybody excited. They're just gonna get mad, right? And they're gonna put up a wall, and they're gonna resist you. And let me tell you something. When you're in a professional situation, don't just think about managing up to your boss. Don't just be like, oh, my boss has to, have a positive impression of me. It is the people that you're partnering with, the lateral people, and it is your team too. It is everybody around you, because your reputation can get taken down by anybody around you. You would be very surprised. So, so you want to just be really intentional and sort of think about like the way you're being perceived, like, managing down, managing laterally, managing up, all of the stuff. But if you walk in again with like sort of a vision, so people are kind of excited by this vision of the future, like, oh, well, we could be doing X. So not like, I can't believe you're not doing 5 reports, but my gosh, like, imagine if we were, like this, effective team with like an amazing communication protocol, and all the work that we could do to blah, 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 the kind of mission of the brand or whatever it is, and then say, I think like one of the steps, like, let's think about the strategies that we can, put in place to get to this amazing vision, right? I think if there was like a better communication protocol, then we'd all be able to join hands and run through walls. And one of the ways I think we could do that is doing 5 reports per week versus 2, right? That's a way better way of like phrasing it and sort of helping people along than like just do the 5 reports because your team sucks, right? Yep. That's not going to be effective. So I think it's having that kind of vision and clarity, for the people around you and for yourself about what it is that you want to do with the organization and how you want to be impactful.
Yeah, well, that was a super on-brand message.
I'm delivering this in an on-brand way too. Like there's a particular way I communicate that is who I am, and
yeah, absolutely. So I think if I look at the other questions that came in, one of the other questions is around on your journey, how do you balance trusting your own instincts and the feedback that you might get? So again, going back to your brand, very core to who you are, very authentic. You're getting feedback that helps you shape and hone it. How do you balance those two in terms of what you need to do and how you show up within the organization?
Wait, how do you balance? I'm sorry, say it again. How do you balance?
Balance the sort of the natural instincts you have about who you are, how you're showing up, with the feedback that you're getting. So you talked a little bit before about the gap between those two, and how do you bring it back to how you're going to operate, how you're going to show up, and continue to again show up in a way that's brand authentic, but also takes the feedback and in progressing.
That's tough. So feedback is tough, guys. I mean, just to be super clear, like feedback is not easy. You just have to, you have to kind of, when you get feedback, it's not always going to be like, oh my God, you're brilliant. Look at you. You're doing an amazing job. Like, go team. Like sometimes it's going to be like, actually, when you gave that presentation, you did so in a manner that, offended this person, or, you were too flip about this, and this person, didn't understand what you were saying, or your deliverables or, your direction to the team was unclear. So you have to, kind of make sure that you're, giving people direction in a way that helps them, achieve their best, or, whatever the feedback is, it's not always going to be, sort of lovely and fabulous. So I think, that, I think one of the things is just being open to it, right? Just being open to the need to course correct sometimes. Just know that we're all human, I'm human, Melly's, we're all human. And so, and none of us are perfect, right? And so if you kind of go into it, with a kind of core desire to be your best, but with this understanding that you're not perfect and you're going to, get some things wrong sometimes, because that is just, the nature of like being alive in the universe, right? It'll sort of help you, and you don't take it personally. I think that's the other thing too, is that there's a, especially when it comes to your personal brand, right? There's an instinct to take it, or I guess instinct to take it personally, right? And oftentimes this feedback, it's not personal. It's just about you being better. So kind of coming at it from the perspective of, I'm human. I'm not always going to do the right thing at all times. And this commentary is in the service of me being better. It's not about like attacking me personally. It's just me being better. That kind of helps you be in a sort of position where you can course correct, right? Where you're not putting up your own walls of feedback, but you're interested in course correcting, right? And I think that the other thing to really kind of understand is that, your brand is delicate, right? It's, it's kind of like trust, right? Trust is something, that takes a long time to build up, right? But it can be gone in a second. Your brand is like that. Your brand takes a long time to build up, but it can be gone. I mean, it can be, negatively impacted or gone in a second. Look at Will Smith.
Yeah.
But seriously, look at Will Smith. I mean, his brand is like a family friendly, kind of like action megastar or whatever, is we'll just say negatively impacted. So, like having, like, be open for feedback, asking for feedback, and doing so again with the understanding that you just want to course correct and be better, but also with the understanding that you're trying to protect your brand and sort of keep it, authentic and healthy for the long term. I think it's like the proper attitude to have, when you're thinking about how you're going to adopt and shift. It's really more about your mindset.
Yeah, that's a great point. Being able to take the feedback is important. Being able to trust your own instinct is important, and then bring the two together is super powerful.
Exactly right.
Yeah. One thing that I would,
excuse me.
So I remember being in a training program early in my career. Actually, it was an ELC for a pipeline program, and they talked about the PI model, performance, image, and exposure. So we talked a lot about image and a bit about exposure. Certainly, the performance is the baseline. But as people think about that and think about that holistic model around how they show up, both in terms of performance, and now we're talking about branding, what advice would you give to them in terms of building their brand? Again, it's not something it's not extra. It's really part and parcel of how you show up in the business context or personal or professional context, I should say. And what would you give them as advice in terms of what to do, whether they're early career or mid-career, in developing their brand or shifting their brand from your point of view?
I would start with defining your brand, right? I think that, it's, for me at least, and it's very helpful for my brand to reflect my personal values, right? So I think that as much as your brand you can reflect your authentic self, the better. And what I sometimes tell people who are kind of struggling to define their brand is start with the sentence "I am" and just fill in the blank, right? I am what, right? And it could be anything from I am a nurturer, I am a teacher, I am a creator, I am an organizer, whatever the sort of core thing that feels very authentic to you, kind of start there, like fill in your I am sentence. Like, what is it, right? And then as you have this fundamental, as you're developing this fundamental understanding of yourself, then you can create the architecture of who you are, your mission, your values, your vision for your future, and all of that can feed into your brand, right? It should fit into your brand. You should, treat it with the same way that you do architecture for, a sort of brand, a consumer-facing brand. How would you do architecture for yourself? It's your values, your mission, your vision, all of that, and then really kind of be very clear about your brand and who you are and what it is that you want to maintain. And then you have an idea of like what your brand is. Audit everything in your life that's public facing to make sure that it reflects this brand, right? It reflects how you envision yourself and how you want people to perceive you. So your LinkedIn, your social media, your email signature, your email address. Like, it's hard to have a certain kind of a brand if your email address is, sexy booty 123, right? You know what I mean? Like that's
I'm so glad you came up with something. I was like,
I have told many people over the years, I'm like, you might want to take a look at your email address and just maybe have a quick think about, about shifting it or whatever.
Yeah.
So just start to audit everything around you to make sure that it's reflecting whatever it is that you have decided is your brand that authentically kind of reflects your core values, right? And then start to work on an intentional plan to put that brand out in the world, right? It's a strategy, right? So maybe it's hashtag, maybe it's you start posting on LinkedIn more, you're using certain kinds of hashtags. Maybe it's you launch a website, that outlines your accomplishment. So when people search for you, they see this come up. Maybe it's even a book project or an e-course, that you develop that kind of distills and crystallizes like the lessons that you've learned and reflects like your personal brand in a more detailed way that allows you to expound upon it. It allows people to get to know you better. But you can be very intentional about the way that you start to put it forth in the world. It doesn't have to be like a sort of a broad swath of, wave of publicity, at any time. You could just start to like feed it in, just a little bit at a time. Maybe it's like a hashtag you use on IG. Maybe it's a hashtag you use on LinkedIn. You could just start there and start to just like clean up your feeds and kind of like clean up your presentation. And really, and then as you get more and more kind of comfortable with it, you can just get more intentional about the way that you think about yourself and about the way that you walk through the world. It's really about being, having a personal brand is really about being intentional in a certain way. It's about knowing yourself. It's about self-awareness. It's about being goal-oriented, and it's about being intentional.
Yeah, great suggestions, great points. Taking that time is just, so as important as taking the time to do your work, because it's the thing that is consistent even across different roles within the organizations. What I also appreciate about what you said is starting with, who you are as a noun versus a verb. I think a lot of times people describe themselves as, the actions that they take or so on, but you're saying really what's core, and using that to frame out the brand and then go from there. So
Exactly. Well, it's a very empowering. I mean, at the end of the day, this is your power. Your personal brand is your power. It's about it's yours. I mean, I feel really strongly about my life and the fact that it is my life. It's here's the thing, guys, right? Nobody can crawl inside your skin and live your life for you. Like the people who love you the best, your parents, your siblings, your partner, your spouse, your friends. Nobody can crawl inside your life and live it for you. It is your life. This thing is yours, right? And your personal brand reflects your life. It is yours, right? So it's kind of scary to a certain extent because you realize you're out here, you have to kind of come up with it yourself. On the other hand, it's yours. You could do, whatever you want, right? So when you really start to kind of get into that mindset, it becomes incredibly powerful and you just want to hone it. You want to be this person. And whatever it is, just do it authentically. Sometimes I look at, if I had a certain, particular kind of brand, I probably would have made my Instagram private, or I would, kind of post different kinds of pictures, but I'm like, it's okay. My personal brand is kind of serious, goal oriented, transformative, change agent, all the things, but it's also fun. The way that I'm talking to you is my brand. Right. And so I'm like, okay, it's okay for people to see me having fun because it's not counter to the way that I'm presenting myself in settings. As a matter of fact, it's consistent.
Yeah. What a great point. We talked a lot about authenticity, but I think that's something that sometimes people struggle with in terms of their personal life and their professional life. What you just talked about in terms of melding the two together and that, being consistent across, A, it's more comfortable, but B, it also allows people to feel like they know you and connect to you in a different way, which is useful. And, just, it's great in terms of getting work done and being able to, to get the mentorship and the feedback and so on that you talked about. So appreciate that. So if you had to say, what's the best thing what's the thing that you take away the most around how your brand has shaped your career or, how you, to your point about owning it, what would you say is the single takeaway you want people to have?
I would say that my brand has helped me establish the relationships that have largely enabled my professional trajectory, right? It's really about relationships at the end of the day. It's super hard to build a big career via just, applying for jobs on job sites. Like that's kind of not how it works, right? There's not for the most part, but once you get into an executive sphere, most of those jobs are hired via like word of mouth or relationships, right? And so not only will hiring managers look to people that they trust in their sphere for recommendations first, right? Before they just put the job out there, they'll look for recommendations. But then they'll also, if you have enough sort of people in your network, if you're known enough, or they'll start to ask people, hey, do you know so and so? Hey, what do you think of so and so? Hey, have you ever worked with so and so? Right? And so what has helped me over the course of my career is being really consistent with who I am and what I'm putting out and continuing to evolve. Mind you, I've gotten, much better, as an executive than I was, I'm much better now than I was 10 years ago. I made a whole lot of mistakes, even a decade ago, that I'm not making today as frequently, hopefully. If there was some wood around, I would knock on it, but hopefully. But we're all, I'm on a path like toward being a better, executive person, mom, all the things, right? But the consistency though, that I've put myself out there, the consistency of the relationships that I've established, the consistency of the commentary around me has been absolutely, not transformative, but has been, absolutely impactful for my career. It has really been the thing that has allowed me to have opportunities in front of me for all of these various positions, and I can't overstate it. I mean, these kinds of relationships that you build out of being consistent with who you are and the way you walk through the world, that is a thing, at least for me, but I have seen it over and over again with other people, that can impact your career trajectory almost more than the accomplishments in any one position.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I think, when we talked before, you talked about intentional, and the word has come up a lot in our conversation. Being intentional about how you operate, who you are, how you show up. Key takeaway in addition to what you just said. So thank you for your time today. I've enjoyed it.
Oh, you're so welcome, guys. I hope you got something out of it. And yes, intentional. That is apparently my word of 2022. So be intentional.
Great word, and something to certainly keep in mind. So thanks very much.
Absolutely.